Learn English through story. The weight of a promise. In the heart of a vast and ancient forest, where the trees whispered secrets of old and the streams flowed with the wisdom of ages, there was a small village called Viridia. The people of Viridia lived in harmony with nature, taking only what they needed and giving back in kind. Among them was a woman named Alara, known throughout the village for her strength of character and unwavering honesty. Alara was not wealthy, nor was she particularly skilled in any trade, but what she had, she offered freely to others. Her integrity was her greatest treasure, and the villagers trusted her deeply. Whenever there was a dispute, Alara was the one to mediate, and whenever someone was in need, she was the first to offer help. She lived a simple life, content with what little she had, and found joy in the trust and respect of her community. One day, a stranger arrived in Viridia. He was a tall man with dark eyes and an air of mystery about him. He wore a cloak of deep blue that seemed to shimmer like the night sky, and he carried a small, intricately carved box. The villagers were wary of him, for they could sense that he was not an ordinary traveler. But Alara, with her open heart, greeted him warmly and offered him shelter. The stranger, who introduced himself as Kale, accepted her hospitality and stayed with Alara for several days. During this time, he spoke little of himself but listened intently to the stories of the village and the people who lived there. He watched Alara closely, as if trying to understand the essence of her character. On the third day, as Kale prepared to leave, he approached Alara with the carved box in his hands. "Alara," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "I have observed your kindness and your honesty. You are a person of great integrity, and I have something to ask of you." Alara looked at the box, intrigued but cautious. "What is it that you ask of me, Kale?" "I ask for a promise," Kale replied, his gaze steady. "This box contains something of immense value, something that must not fall into the wrong hands. I cannot take it with me, and I cannot entrust it to anyone else. I ask you to keep it safe and to never open it, no matter what happens. Do you promise?" Alara hesitated. The request was unusual, and the weight of the promise hung heavily in the air. But she saw the seriousness in Kale's eyes and felt the gravity of his words. She had always been true to her word, and she did not want to break that trust now. "I promise," Alara said finally, taking the box from Kale's hands. "I will keep it safe and never open it." Kale nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Alara. You have done a great service. Remember, your word is your bond." With that, he turned and left the village, disappearing into the forest without a trace. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The box sat on a shelf in Alara's small home, untouched and undisturbed. At first, Alara did not think much of it, content to fulfill her promise. But as time passed, curiosity began to gnaw at her. What could be so valuable that Kale would entrust it to her, yet so dangerous that it must never be opened? One night, as Alara sat by the fire, the box seemed to call to her, whispering of secrets hidden within. She tried to ignore it, but the thought of what might be inside consumed her mind. She had always been honest, but now her honesty was at war with her curiosity. Finally, she could bear it no longer. Surely just a peek would do no harm, she reasoned with herself. "I've kept my promise for so long, and Kale is far away by now. What difference could it make?" With trembling hands, Alara reached for the box. As she lifted the lid, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the fire. Inside the box was a small mirror, its surface smooth and flawless. Alara stared into the mirror, and as she did, her reflection began to change. She saw herself, not as she was, but as she could have been, a richer, more powerful, and revered by all. The image was intoxicating, and for a moment, she was lost in the vision of a life filled with luxury and adoration. But then the vision faded, and Alara was left staring at her true self, ordinary, unadorned, and painfully human. A deep sense of shame washed over her. She had broken her promise, and for what? A fleeting illusion of grandeur? The trust that Kale had placed in her was shattered, and so too was her own sense of self-worth. The next morning, Alara took the box deep into the forest, far from the village. She buried it beneath an ancient oak tree, hoping to rid herself of the burden of her broken promise. But no matter how deep she buried it, the guilt lingered, a constant reminder of her failure. When she returned to the village, the people noticed a change in her. The light that had once shone so brightly in her eyes was dimmed, and the joy she had once found in simple things was gone. She continued to live her life, but the trust she had so carefully built was now tainted by the knowledge of her broken word. Years passed, and Alara grew old. On her deathbed, she called the village elders to her side. With tears in her eyes, she confessed her broken promise and the weight it had carried. "I was entrusted with something precious," she said weakly, "and I failed. Let my story be a lesson. Our integrity is the most valuable thing we possess, and once lost, it is hard to reclaim." As she took her last breath, the villagers wept, not only for the loss of a beloved member of their community but for the heavy price of a broken promise. Moral: the integrity of one's word is a treasure beyond measure. Once broken, it can cast a shadow over a lifetime. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.